Thank you for joining us today for our virtual community meeting. My name is Perry Dugard Owens, and our team is happy to assist TDOT today in hosting this meeting. Today, you will learn more about the multimodal recommendations in TDOT Region 4 as part of TDOT's study of needs for the entire I-40 corridor, as well as the I-81 corridor. A few items to note while we are waiting for the meeting to start. Since we are in a virtual environment, you have been muted upon entry to avoid meeting background noise. If you have questions, please enter the question in the question and answer box to the right of your screen, and we will answer them in order during our Q&A segment. If you do not hear your question directly, it's because we are grouping similar questions by topic. This is the third of 4 virtual meetings that will happen in each TDOT region along the corridor from East Tennessee all the way over to West Tennessee. Please share our virtual meeting information with your friends in other regions of the corridor. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our host for the evening, TDOT Region 4 Representative Antoine Hawkins. Antoine?
Thank you so much, Perry. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the second round of public meetings for our I-40, I-81 multimodal corridor study. As Perry shared, my name is Antoine Hawkins, and I serve as the TDOT Region 4 Office of Community Transportation Planning Supervisor. We are very happy to host you today, and thank you for your time. Now, the purpose of this study is to identify current and future multimodal needs along all of I-40 and I-81 statewide over a time frame of the next 20 years. And within this study, develop solutions for we as TDOT to consider. Now, I do want to share that this is a study and does not make any final decisions. However, the recommendations included therein that you'll see today will be reviewed and can lead to future projects. For example, our previous I-40 study was adopted in 2008, and several projects in that plan were implemented, such as widenings within the cities of Memphis and widenings that are currently ongoing in Jackson. Now, some of you may have participated in the public meetings previously and the comment period we had earlier this year when we were at the stage of the existing conditions and identifying needs. This evening's meeting is the second part designed to provide you with an overview of the types of issues that have been studied along the corridor and a range of suggested solutions. And again, as Perry shared, we will address questions throughout, so please feel free to type those into the question and answer chat box. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to Gene Stevens with WSP, who's going to lead the discussion and provide an overview of the study findings and potential solutions. Take it away, Gene.
All right. Thanks very much, Antoine. We really appreciate everybody coming tonight to the meeting. We will do a quick recap of the study purpose for those who weren't around for those round 1 public meetings. And then, as Antoine just said, we'll talk about the types of needs and solutions that are being presented this evening for comment. Now, we're not planning to get too deep in the weeds today on any specific project, but at the Q&A period, I do have a couple of team members with me who might help field questions at the end of the presentation. And as Antoine just mentioned, you're welcome to type your questions into the Q&A box, and you can do it at any time during the presentation, especially if you think you might forget your question, but we are going to wait till the end to start responding. All right, as Antoine mentioned, this is a study covers a 20-year time frame, but the recommendations will be phased so that it includes some short-term, low-hanging fruit. This is a data-driven planning process that identifies current and future interstate needs, and importantly, with input from people who live and work along the corridor like you and use it for your travels. And that study will result in a pool of projects that decision makers can consider as funding becomes available. Now, this is by far the longest interstate corridor in Tennessee. It totals about 530 miles when you add I-40 and I-81 together. Spans the entire state from the Arkansas state line here in Region 4 to the Virginia state line. And then also when you look at I-40 going down to North Carolina, we've got another state line crossing there. All in all, the corridor passes through a total of 28 counties that you see here in gray and connects 8 out of the state's 11 metropolitan areas. This evening's meeting is focused on the portion of the interstate that's located within TDOT's Region 4, which runs from Memphis eastward all the way to the Tennessee River. This slide shows the project stages in relation to public engagement. In round 1 of our public meetings, as Antoine said, we talked about current and future interstate conditions and got your input on where the needs are. At this meeting, we're going to talk about the potential solutions before this final study is complete. And we'll be taking public comment this month through an online survey, and I'm going to provide that link on one of our final slides because we want you to take it. All right, so this shows the recommended solution types that we're going to be talking about. First would be highway expansion, and that can include everything from a new lane on the interstate to interchange or interchange ramp improvements. We'll also talk about safety projects, both on the I-40-81 corridor itself and on the main detour routes for the interstate. We will be talking about something that we refer to as Tismo, which stands for Transportation Systems Management and Operations. That's a mouthful. That's basically an approach to managing our existing system more efficiently rather than adding physical capacity. We'll talk a little bit more about that. In terms of freight projects, things that improve the safe and efficient movement of freight and goods, which is really important to the national, state, and local economy. And then finally, we'll talk about transit and make sure that we're providing options for people who either can't or don't want to drive, and not just locally, but within regions of the state, excuse me, and across Tennessee. Now, even before this study began, there were already some projects identified for I-40 and I-81 through the IMPROVE Act passed by the Tennessee General Assembly a few years ago. And on this slide, you see the IMPROVE Act projects that are here in TDOT Region 4. They include the widening of I-40 through Jackson, and you see here we've described that as US 45 bypass to US 70, but that actually consists of two different projects. I think one got started a good bit earlier than the other, so just to be clear about that. But a big piece of that was a widening through Jackson and related interchange improvements that are already underway. Also on the very east side of the region, adding a third lane to I-40 over near the Decatur and Benton County line, where there actually was, as Antoine mentioned, a recommendation in the last I-40 study for a truck climbing lane. Other projects include in Memphis, widening a section of I-40 in the location between Germantown Road and Airline Road. So one reason we showed this slide is it's really important to keep in context that these projects are already underway or at least on the books, and recognize that when we're looking at other improvements to the corridor. Now on this next slide, we've left the IMPROVE Act projects on the map for that context, but we've added new highway expansion projects that are being recommended as part of this study. I'm going to turn it over for a couple of minutes to Paige Harris. She's one of the engineers on our project team to talk about the recommendations. Paige?
Thanks, Jean. Yeah, so as shown and as outlined on this slide, there are numerous proposed highway improvement recommendations in the Region 4 area, as well as projects that are currently underway, as Jean just noted. The next slide highlights the specifics of those located in Shelby and Madison County. So Jean, if you could go to the next slide for me. So I'm going to use the bullets on the left side of the slide as talking points and reference the appropriate location of them on the map on the right. So starting in Madison County and in the Jackson area, the blue dot represents ramp improvements at exit 87, US 70, in order to increase capacity. And as Jean just mentioned, the yellow line near this interchange represents an interstate widening project, which just recently began construction. This interstate project may address the capacity issue at this interchange, therefore eliminating the need for this recommendation in particular. Continuing on to Shelby County and to the downtown Memphis area, starting on the far left of the Shelby County map, the yellow dot represents adding a collector distributor system to reduce weaving movements in the westbound direction between State Route 1, Danny Thomas Boulevard, to 2nd Street. Also known as a CD system, a collector distributor road is an additional parallel lane on the interstate that's usually barrier separated, which collects and distributes entering and exiting traffic, which reduces the merging and weaving areas on the interstate system. Staying in the downtown area of Memphis, the red line represents widening I-40 from exit 1E, which is I-240, to exit 2A, State Route 300, from the current configuration of 6 lanes to 8 lanes total. And lastly, staying in the same vicinity, the blue dot represents reconfiguring the ramps at exit 3, North Watkins Road, in order to improve traffic operations. And lastly, staying in Shelby County, but continuing to the east, the red dot represents a new potential interchange at Chambers Chapel Road based on anticipated economic development and growth in the area. Next slide, Jean. So as Jean mentioned earlier, safety enhancements are a solution type that's covered in the evaluation of the corridor. The safety enhancements shown on this slide cover proposed incident management improvements. As noted on the map by the purple line along I-40 throughout most of Region 4, it is proposed to provide help light service in Fayette, Haywood, Madison, Henderson, Carroll, Decatur, and Benton counties. Currently, TDOT provides the help program within the urban areas of Memphis, as shown by the yellow line, as well as Nashville, Chattanooga, and Knoxville for highway incident management purposes. Help trucks, they patrol the most heavily traveled freeways and assist folks with things such as flat tires, provide gasoline or diesel if needed, and help clear congestion-causing accidents on the highway. Help Light would be somewhat of an extension of the program that's currently in place, but Help Light trucks would not patrol continuously, but instead only be called when needed. And it also should be noted that I-40 just east of Jackson within this Region 4 area, it is much less populated compared to other parts of the corridor. And so with fewer population centers nearby, it is particularly important to have the ability to detect incidents and dispatch a responder if needed. Next slide, Jean. In addition to incident management improvements, there are additional safety recommendations in Region 4. Along I-40, there is one recommendation near the Carroll-Henderson County line on the right side of the map, which includes the addition of an emergency crossover within the interstate median area near exit 116, which is also Natchez Trace Parkway. As some of you may be aware of, this area of the interstate is separated in the eastbound and westbound direction by dense trees and wooded areas since it's near the state park. In addition, it's a relatively long stretch of interstate here where there's no opportunity to exit, which has been a challenge in the past when incidents occur and traffic needs to be diverted. So adding an emergency crossover feature here will provide a safe space for law enforcement and emergency personnel to turn around or to respond to roadway incidents. And it can also be utilized for maintenance operations and activities such as snow removal. There is also a safety improvement recommendation to one of the detour routes, which are utilized when an interstate diversion is in place. These detours are determined by TDOT and outlined in their incident management plan for each region. The proposed safety project is noted by the green line in Madison County and includes improvements to US 70, also known as Brownsville Highway, from Huntersville, Denmark Road to Algie Neely Road. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jean, who's going to cover the remaining slides.
All right, thanks, Paige. Good stuff. All right, now let's talk about that category called Tismo, Transportation Systems Management and Operations. As I mentioned earlier, this is really about trying to maximize the efficiency of what we've already got out there without having to add something. So when done right, it can delay the need to physically expand the facility. And I want to point out that it often involves technology, but it does not have to be a Tismo strategy. In fact, a couple of the ones here at the bottom, the examples that I'm giving on this slide, real-time traveler information has been around since radio stations first began providing traffic reports, and it's just gotten more sophisticated over time. For instance, TDOT now has its SmartWay system, which can give you like real-time traffic and weather conditions, either by calling 511 on your phone, looking at maps on their website, or using a smartphone app. So that's an example of real-time traveler information. It's just gotten better and better. The next example I've got here, integrated corridor management, is an approach to manage mobility in a corridor by balancing the use of various routes and modes that are available. And an example, to some extent, this is already happening. The traffic reporter would suggest an alternate route, or maybe if you're using Waze, it would reroute you. So this would be an example of ICM. Now, it takes it a step further to actually call it ICM because you're formalizing cooperation among the different agencies who operate part of the system. As an example, TDOT's responsible for traffic flow on the interstate, whereas a city or county would be in charge likely of managing those parallel highways. And in a lot of cases, they're already coordinating during special events. And what ICM would do is make this kind of coordination a more everyday occurrence. The third example here, examples of managed lanes would be HOV lanes like we have in Memphis and Nashville. Now, as you all are probably well aware, if you've driven those areas, there are a lot of challenges with these, and particularly enforcement is a challenge. A lot of states are moving to instead to what we call a hot lane or a high occupancy toll. What those lanes do is still allow a high occupancy vehicle, one that's got at least 2 people. Those can travel for free, just like they did before, but you can also allow single occupant cars to use the special lane for a price if there's unused space available. So that's where the toll comes in. So it's still free for HOV, but you would allow people, as long as there's room, you can't, inconvenience the HOVs, but as long as the speeds are moving along, you would be able to allow single occupants in. Now that final example, ramp metering, is an approach that optimizes traffic in all lanes, not just one managed lane. If you haven't seen it before, it's basically a traffic signal on the ramp. Green means you can enter the interstate as normal. Red means you have to wait. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, but having people wait on the ramp will actually make their total trip take less time. Again, it sounds counterintuitive, but the data backs it up. And ramp metering is most effective when every ramp is metered within a segment of a corridor. So, having said that, let's talk a little bit about Tismo Opportunities. Just a minute ago, I mentioned traveler information and the example of TDOT SmartWay. And in the lower left corner of this slide, you see an example of the kind of video camera feed that you can currently view on TDOT's website for locations along both I-40 and I-81. There's a lot of cameras in the Memphis area. But this equipment isn't just used for the traveler information. It collects data that lets TDOT implement all kinds of Tismo strategies, including the ones that we just talked about. So whenever SmartWay expansion happens, you're getting radar speed detection, roadway weather sensors, flooding or icing or fog, CCTV cameras like this one here on the left, and those dynamic message signs that tell us when we need to divert or if there's something ahead of us. And what we're showing on the big map on this slide is the stuff in green is where SmartWay already exists. And Paige had referenced earlier that our major urban areas already have some help patrols. They've also got the SmartWay. It helps them detect incidents. Where the lines are shown in orange are places that TDOT already has concrete plans to expand SmartWay. So what you see here is that SmartWay is going to be expanded in Region 4 pretty much for that whole area that Paige talked about for help light service. And the great thing about that is with this kind of instrumentation I just talked about along this section of I-40, they will be able to detect incidents maybe a little earlier and to be able to use the cameras to get a better sense of what's going on so that when they do dispatch somebody, they know kind of what they're dealing with and what kind of equipment they need to send. And then the final thing on this map is the purple lines. This shows what gaps would be left on the I-40-81 corridor after TDOT finishes the stuff that it has planned in orange. And one opportunity to fill some of these gaps could be for TDOT to work with private companies, because there's a lot of folks out there that would like to have fiber extended. All right, so here are some potential management strategies that can be considered in Region 4, and all of them are in the immediate Memphis area. We mentioned ICM earlier, which manages traffic by moving it between available routes in a larger corridor. In this part of the 81 corridor, the 40-81 corridor, there's actually a really good set of parallel routes. You've got multiple options, including US Highway 64 and US Highway 70-79. Another potential strategy is that second bullet, which would be to convert the existing HOV lane on I-40, which is shown here in orange, and convert that into a hot lane. And again, transit and high occupancy vehicles, two people or more, would still use the lane for free, but if there's excess space available, then a single occupant vehicle could use the lane for a fee. So that orange line being the HOV lane, that could be converted to hot. But as we mentioned a minute ago, there are other approaches where you can manage all lanes, not just one. So we also recommend looking at ramp metering for a portion of I-40, generally between exit 1 and exit 16 at Germantown Parkway. We think this will provide better mobility than a managed lane, although further analysis is going to be needed before implementing anything. Here's another example of technology that's improving things along the corridor, weigh in motion. These devices and sensors provide an opportunity to improve the efficiency of truck weigh stations. They can record truck axle weights and gross vehicle weights without requiring trucks to make a complete stop. So you get a much more efficient process than static weigh stations. And you see on this map that TDOT's looking at future weigh in motion installations for 2 different I-40 weigh stations here in Region 4, in Shelby County and in Haywood County. Not only does this technology help with way station enforcement activities, it gives an opportunity to collect data on traffic volumes, axle spacings, vehicle classification, and speed. And having this kind of data can help TDOT with planning, pavement and bridge design, freight movement studies, and studies on truck size and weight. Now, if you visit Cracker Barrel, you may have seen electric vehicle charging stations like the one in this photo. Now, as many of you are aware, electric vehicles are becoming more popular, and that's not just true for cars, but for heavy trucks as well. In fact, Walmart just purchased a large fleet of electric trucks for its use. They're liking them because they can be pretty cost effective, not just because they're saving on diesel, but because the engines are simpler and fewer parts means less to maintain. Now, one reason this makes a real difference is because trucks, even though they're a lot cleaner than they used to be, they still contribute most of the air pollution that's related to traffic. So the opportunity to help trucks go electric could be good for our health, as well as conserving on non-renewable resources like fossil fuels. Anyway, regardless of whether your electric vehicle is a car or a truck, you're more likely to use one if you know you can count on finding a charging station when you need it. So Federal Highway has created what they call an alternative fuels corridor program. Its goal is to build a network of alternative fuel and charging stations along the nation's major highways. The program has two classifications, either corridor ready or corridor pending. And the section of I-40 shown in yellow and orange over in regions 3 and 2 and a little bit in 1 is considered already corridor ready. What that means is that it meets the guidelines shown here on the bottom of the slide. You've got stations located at least every 50 miles, public stations. Those stations are no further than 5 miles off the corridor, and they've got multiple connector types. And the reason that's important for multiple connectors is because those technology standards are still evolving. And you can imagine what that's like if you think about how many phone chargers you've collected over the last 10 years, and a lot of them weren't standardized until very recently. Now, talking about transit, I-40 and I-81 play a pretty important role in transit service, but in a lot of different contexts across the state. On this map, you see the areas shown in purple where there is regular fixed route bus service. So here in Region 4, you see Memphis and Jackson highlighted because they both have local bus systems. But in addition to that city-based transit, the I-40 corridor is critical to the operations for rural public transit agencies. They provide daily service to citizens traveling to and from the larger urban areas, a lot of times for medical appointments, but also for jobs and other services. So those rural agencies may be traveling in and out of Memphis, Jackson, or even Nashville every day. They probably use I-40 more than the city transit agencies do. And I want to make the point that transit agencies, the operators, and their riders can benefit from a lot of the same infrastructure improvements that we're presenting this evening, whether it's projects to improve traffic congestion in urban areas where that rural transit van is trying to get to the medical appointments so that their riders can get there on time, perhaps facilities that provide a place for slower vehicles and steep grades, and maybe improvements to interchanges that have tight ramps or short ramps. Because if you think about it, the challenges related to steering a bus are pretty similar to the way it is to drive a truck. There's another opportunity that's been identified through this study, and it's for TDOT and local transit agencies to partner on the creation of future park and ride lots along the corridor. As some of you may know, the Nashville area already has regional commuter transit service from out to the adjoining counties to Davidson, both commuter rail and express bus. And as you see from this map, there are some other transit agencies in East Tennessee that see a potential for that kind of regional commuter service over the next 10 to 20 years if there are convenient park and ride lots available. Now, in addition to park and rides, this study recommends a couple of additional items to be considered next time TDOT updates its intercity bus assessment, because this corridor is the backbone for privately operated intercity bus service that crosses the state, like Greyhound. Now, in Tennessee's larger urban areas, Greyhound and its competitors typically pick up and drop off at a major transit center, in, for instance, Memphis or Nashville. But in other parts of the state, there may not be a formal transit stop where passengers can wait. The place to catch the intercity bus may be at a local gas station or even a place that doesn't have restrooms or other amenities. The other thing to be looking at as that intercity bus assessment is updated is schedule. Obviously, when you're traveling the state end to end, you're going to have a time for pickup that's not convenient for somebody, but it is worth looking at what the schedules are and how well different areas are served. Now, this concludes our formal presentation, and we're about to open up the question and answer period. But before we do that, I want to point out the other ways that you can learn more about the study and provide input on what you've heard at this meeting. In the upper right corner, there's a link to TDOT's website for this study, which has some other materials that you can review. And also in the upper right here is a link to an online survey that we would really welcome you to take. If you prefer to make comments separately from the survey, or if you have other questions after this meeting, there's information here in the bottom left corner for Antoine Hawkins, who you heard from earlier at the TDOT Region 4 office, as well as Joan Barnfield, who is TDOT's overall project manager for the study. And for those of you who like to use stamps, we do have the mailing address here as well for Joan down in the bottom right corner. So these slides will be posted on TDOT's website in the next day or so. And if you lose the link, I think we'll put up, Anne-Marie has already put it in the chat box. So if you want to just click on it from there, you can take the survey. But if you forget, you can wake up and look at the slides on TDOT's website, open up the PowerPoint, and the link will be here still. So you got lots of options. So with that, I don't know, I haven't looked at the question and answer box yet to see if we have gotten any questions. You all may have been typing some in while we talked. This would be a time if you wondered about something that as we were going through slides, either asking maybe about some of the recommendations for strategies that you may not have heard about before, like ramp metering, or if you had questions on any of the projects that Paige showed for safety or highway expansion, we would welcome those. We've got a few people here tonight that could address those. Okay, I see one here. Chris, if you may want to address this one, and the question is related to how can you enforce a hot lane? How do you know that the HOV people who are trying not to pay the toll actually have two people in the car?
That is a great question, and it has been the subject and the bane of the existence of managed lanes planners for about 30 years now. Fortunately, we are starting to see some significant improvement. There are two things that you have to enforce. Number one, you've got to be able to enforce toll payments. So if somebody is not an HOV and is supposed to pay a toll, you've got to be able to identify that person. And second, and the more difficult thing has always been to determine the number of persons that are in the vehicle. For toll enforcement, it's fairly easy. It's technology that's very mature. It is using a camera on the license plate. It does not need to take a picture of the occupants of the vehicle. Excuse me. And it works very, very well on numerous facilities throughout the country. The harder one, like I said, has always been, how do you know how many people are really in there? And there have been many, many things that have been proposed, but there are two things now that are really coming to the forefront. Number one is a video detection system. Now, I think that is going to require some changes in Tennessee law because it does look inside the vehicle. And there's a system that's being piloted now in Los Angeles that is supposed to be able to take a picture of the front seat of the vehicle as well as the back seat of the vehicle. We're going to be watching that very closely to see how it works. The second thing, and I think this is probably really going to catch on, is there are now apps. I mean, let's face it, there's an app for everything. And there are two services that are out there, one of which basically looks at the number of Bluetooth devices that are in the vehicle and transmits that information to the toll agency to determine whether or not it meets HOV requirements or not. The second one does take a picture, but it uses face differentiation to see how many people are in the vehicle. And the photo never leaves the phone that is in the vehicle. So it's not nearly as intrusive as a photograph that would have to go elsewhere. I hope that helped.
Great, Chris. Thank you very much. The technologies, here's a follow-up on that one, Chris. The question is, how do you see through dark, heavily tinted windows to count persons?
It's actually a little easier than you might think. I do not have the knowledge on how these cameras work, but tinted windshields have gone through the testing and it does work. But like I said, we're going to be watching that LA deployment very closely to see how well it actually works.
Great. Okay, it looks like we've got a couple of questions coming in about some of the projects we mentioned that are already underway. Unfortunately, this team is pretty focused on planning ahead and looking at things that need to be implemented. We did share that map with the projects that are underway, but I'm afraid we'll need to pass along to TDOT and get them to follow up with you on those specific projects that are already funded and being worked on. We didn't mention this, but actually when you guys entered your email to come into the meeting, we are able to see afterward who asked which questions. So we have a great way to be able to follow up with you if we can't answer your question tonight. Also, I think I'm thinking there might be some information on some of the larger projects on TDOT's website. Antoine, I don't know if that's if there's a particular area. I know some of the region offices, if you go to that portion of the TDOT website.
Absolutely, yes, Gene. There is some information in terms of the status of some of the projects, at least where the status is. It may not give an exact date in terms of when it's going to be completed, but it'll give a general idea of the timeline for the projects. And also, any questions can be entered as one of our said. They can enter questions to T.dot comments. If there are specific questions, we can research and provide a more detailed answer.
And then is there a TDOT comments email as well?
Yes.
What is that address? Do you remember?
Okay, sure, I can put it in the chat box.
Oh, yeah, good idea. Great idea. Okay, here's a question. Is tolling legislatively approved in Tennessee? And if so, what is the intent of the revenue generated for tolling? Okay, great question. The first answer is kind of. Tolling was approved by the General Assembly several years back, but only for a limited number of pilot projects because they did want to see how it might work out. And part of that legislation provided that you can only toll if there is still a free alternative. And what they did was authorize TDOT to look at a small number of bridges and a small number of roads. They didn't specify where. They had let the department do feasibility studies to try to evaluate where to apply it. To my knowledge, none of those pilots has actually panned out, but the legislation does still stand. There was also a little bit of discussion a couple of sessions ago with the legislature on specifically authorizing hot lanes. As Chris mentioned, right now it would actually take an active bill to allow that. As far as the revenue generated for tolling, obviously, since we don't have any tolling facilities and the legislation doesn't really, it only authorizes a couple of pilots, we can't answer that question for Tennessee, and we can't speak to what the General Assembly or TDOT would choose to use the revenue for. But I might ask Chris to talk about in other states, how does that work? Like, does the tolling revenue cover the whole cost of the project? How does that work?
Well, one of those great "it depends" answer. And what it depends on is what the capital cost was to bring the project online as to whether the tolls will pay for the entire project. On something like a conversion of the HOV to HOT lanes, I would imagine the tolls would easily cover the cost of conversion and operation because you're not building a brand new lane. If you do build a new lane, frankly, that usually will not have sufficient revenue to completely cover it. You've got to look at several things. Number one is, do you have any debt or any bonds issued on that? They have to be paid first. The second thing that has to be paid is operation and maintenance costs. Anything left over, and there are facilities with leftover money, can be used for a lot of different purposes. There's something in the United States code called Title 23, which basically covers the roadways in the US under federal jurisdiction, like interstates. And under that particular law right now, tolls that get past debt and get past O&M can go to any Title 23 eligible service, which can include new roadway construction or a lot of the existing hot lanes that have excess revenues actually use it to help defray the cost of transit services, which gives you a different mode that people can choose and still take advantage of some better service on the freeway. Hope that helped.
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. I appreciate that, Chris. I know you've worked in a lot of different states and have that broader perspective on how different states have approached this. So that was great. Oh, there's Antoine has now put in the chat box the link for all the projects, so at least the projects in Region 4 that TDOT's got information posted on, you would be able to find there. So that is there as well. That's what I love about these meetings is we're here to talk about the study, but sometimes we're also able to direct you to information on other questions. We're sure glad Antoine's here tonight. Are there any other questions? So far, the only questions we haven't answered, we'll need to follow up because they're about specific projects and their status. But this is a good time to ask. We appreciate the questions we've got, especially on some of the stuff that would be new in Tennessee. It's a great opportunity just for folks to learn about how would it work so that you have a better idea about whether it seems like a good idea for Tennessee and for I-40 in Region 4. Okay. I'm not seeing any further questions. So, oh, here we go. Okay, we have a question here. Will hot lanes be expanded in Memphis? Well, there aren't currently any hot lanes. Now, in terms of whether HOV lanes will be expanded, I'm not aware of any new HOV lanes that TDOT's built in a while. There have been a couple of widening projects in Nashville in the last 5 years. One of them did include HOV lanes, but the most recent one did not. Now, I can't speak to whether that's a trend, but we did talk earlier in the presentation about in Tennessee how challenging it has been to enforce HOV lanes and have them used and improve mobility the way that they're supposed to. I guess our experts feel like if you're going to manage lanes, hot might be the way to go, just because what can sometimes happen is when you do enforce the HOV lane, it's only half full. And so there's extra space there that could be used, and you could be making some money from it if you're letting single occupant vehicles pay a toll. And then don't forget, there's also the ramp metering option, where you're optimizing traffic in all lanes, not just the one managed lane. Okay, we do have a question about the I-40 Arkansas River Bridge replacement project. Unfortunately, that's one that none of us here tonight can actually speak to, but the good news is we can see from who signed in which of you has that question. So with your email address, we'll be able to follow up and share that information. I am sorry that we don't have it right here at our fingertips. Okay, here's another one that kind of follows up on tolling and tolling technology. Chris, would TDOT use Easypass tolling to be consistent with other states?
Well, I'm not going to speak for TDOT, but I can tell you that neighboring states such as Georgia has just become compatible with Easypass. And there are also some other systems that are out there that could be used also in Tennessee if TDOT were to decide to become interoperable. Interoperable just means your transponder at one spot can be used at a different spot. That's all interoperable means. There's actually federal law that is requiring there to be interoperability in the foreseeable future. We're not there yet, but most toll facilities that I'm aware of, and I think I know pretty much all of them in the US, do have a great deal of interoperability between states. So while I can't speak for TDOT, I would not be at all surprised if they looked to be interoperable at least with surrounding states. And the Easypass that you mentioned is it is the largest system that is out there. So it would make some pretty good sense for TDOT to work with Easypass, but that'll be a decision they'll have to make down the road.
In addition to the decision on whether or not to do tolling. I just want to be sure, since we are talking about tolling a lot, I think it's good to get the information and the questions out there, but I do want to emphasize that would yet be a decision of the General Assembly.
Absolutely.
Can't say that too much.
Hey, Jean, I did want to add one quick comment too.
Yeah, please go right ahead.
In terms of the specific project, it's not the bridge. So the Memphis, Arkansas bridge isn't currently being replaced. What's in the works to be replaced is the I-55 Crump interchange leading to the bridge. So I did want to make sure to have that point of clarity up. So it's not
Good.
the actual bridge that's going to be replaced. So that's not on the docket. It's just the interchange.
Thank you, Antoine. That helps a lot.
You're welcome.
And I don't know if the person who asked that question, if you want to just put another note in the chat box and let us know if that does answer your question, or if you do need to still follow up, because I'm sure TDOT would be happy to. Great, we were able to get another question answered. Well, this has been a great discussion. Let's see. Okay, here's another follow-up, Chris, on tolling. I don't know if this is a tolling technology question, though. Could there be broad support for tolling in Tennessee due to the economic downturn of COVID-19? Well, COVID is a good point. And I think one question that all transportation planners have right now, and probably a lot of businesses too, is how much is traffic on the roads going to come back when this is all said and done? Because we do know that a lot of folks were fortunately able to do some work from home, and that probably some of that's going to continue. And so when you're looking 20 years out, it is tough to know. Traffic counts are way down this year so far, but over the next year or two, how much of that is going to bounce back? We don't know. And honestly, that's one reason we update plans every so often, is because we need to know, are these things that look like trends, are they trends, or are they just blips for like a 1 year question? So I think you're making a good point here in asking this question about the fact that COVID has dampened traffic. Clearly anything, and this is something that Chris might speak to, or maybe we may just kind of leave it with what I'm going to say, but if tolling were to be considered on any stretch of road, every state always does a detailed traffic and revenue analysis to figure out, does this make sense as a toll route? So any kind of implementation of tolling would be over a period of several years. And because of that, I would think that we would have a chance to see what does happen to traffic after COVID hopefully is over.
Gene, I can tell you that is a major topic of discussion among folks in the tolling profession right now. The general gist of the response from the industry as a whole seems to be that yes, there will be more work at home than we saw pre-COVID. However, just general growth, particularly in a place like Tennessee, which is so attractive to new folks and new development, there's going to be a replacement for that good benefit for the traffic that's not going to be on there. So the thinking right now is, when you look 20 years out, it's probably not going to have as much traffic as originally thought, but the impact of COVID is not going to be so significant that we're going to see permanent traffic reduction.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned COVID, because that is something actually that I had meant to mention, just that, we all acknowledge that things are quite unusual this year. It makes it tough to plan. All right, you guys got any questions left in you? Now is the time. All right, seeing none, then Perry, I would like to ask you to close this out.
Absolutely. Thank you again for joining us today for our virtual community meeting. We hope that you received some valuable information about the study of the I-40 and I-81 corridors. A few reminders: this is the third of 4 virtual meetings that will happen along the corridor. We'll be hosting these from East Tennessee all the way over to West Tennessee. To provide comments and stay up to date on the final results of the study, please refer to the project webpage that was shown earlier. Thank you so much for joining us, and good night.